So my name is Ryan. I'm on the team with Halt the Harm Network. We're one of the supporters of this event. And I'll be behind the scenes in the chat, helping out with any technical issues. You can send me a private message or I'll be there to answer any questions. This event is recorded. It's part of the Health and Safety in Beaver County virtual event series. And we're also streaming live on Facebook. So feel free to hop over to the Facebook event and share as well. And you can also ask questions in the chat throughout this event. We'll be compiling the questions and saving them for the end after we're done with the speaker series. And so with that, welcome. We are going to be keeping everybody muted during this first portion of the event. And I'll say hello to our host today, Sister Kari. Hello.
Hello, thank you. My name is Kari Pohl. I'm a member of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Baden, Pennsylvania, located here in Beaver County. We're a group of women religious in the Roman Catholic faith tradition. Our congregation has a sustainability committee, and for the past year, its particular focus has been on the care of water. It's out of that context that I'm honored to be the moderator of tonight's event on water monitoring and drinking water safety in the Health and Safety in Beaver County virtual event series. 2 weeks ago, as part of this series, we focused on air monitoring and emergency services. If you missed that informative event, a recording is available for review on Beaver County Marcellus Awareness Community's Facebook page. Tonight, as I mentioned, our outstanding panel will be discussing water monitoring and drinking water safety. After their short pre-recorded presentations, our speakers will all be here live for a question and answer session and discussion. I'd ask that you please post any questions that you might have using the chat feature on Zoom or posting a question on Facebook. I'm briefly going to introduce each speaker as we go through the event, and then following the presentations, we'll take questions for the panelists. Ryan, I can't remember if Bob Schmetzer is doing a welcome at this event or if that was just for the last event. Help me out.
Yeah, we do have a prepared welcome video for Bob as well.
Thanks.
All right, so here we go. We'll get started. And
hello, I'm Bob Schmetzer, Chairman of BCMAC and Citizens to Protect the Ambridge Reservoir. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Water Monitoring and Drinking Water Safety virtual event, Wednesday, September 30th, 2020 at 7 p.m. Our goal is to bring experts to explain water safety. When we go to the tap, there's a sacred trust that the water you're about to drink is safe. Drinking water comes from multiple sources. First is private wells that make up the majority for private use. They're basically unregulated, and multiple sources of contamination leave the wells vulnerable to man-made and natural dangers. Second, municipal water authorities are regulated by state and federal guidelines. The water sources come from rivers, lakes, reservoirs, and springs. Authorities are quasi-municipal governments made up of appointments from local governments. They are funded by bond issues and water fees. I want to thank you so much for being part of this very informative event. And now I would like to turn over the program to our moderator, Sister Kari Pohl.
Thank you, Bob. Our first presenter tonight is Richard Harrison, the Executive Director of ORSANCO, the Ohio River Valley Sanitation Commission. ORSANCO was established in 1948 to control and abate pollution in the Ohio River Basin. It's an interstate commission representing 8 states and the federal government. Member states include Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and West Virginia. Mr. Harrison.
Good evening. It's great to be here this evening with you. Really appreciate the invite and appreciate everything you all do for the basin and really working to protect our great Ohio River. My name is Richard Harrison. I'm Executive Director of ORSANCO. I'm just going to talk a few minutes about ORSANCO's monitoring programs, specifically some of the monitoring we do that might help with understanding the impacts of petrochemical industry work on the Ohio River. We do programs within the source water protection arena. That's a major part of our work. But we also do a lot of water quality monitoring and assessment work. And we have programs really surrounding that area. We do monitoring at each of the locks and dams. I shouldn't say each. Really, the first one we do is at New Cumberland on the Ohio River. But we have 20 locations that we do on the Ohio River. And we also monitor at 15 tributaries, including the Allegheny and the Mon and Beaver River. So that gives us a really good understanding of what's happening at the headwaters as the river starts. And then with our next location at the New Cumberland Dam, it also gives us an idea of what's happening below Beaver County. So again, appreciate being here. Some of our other monitoring we do is we work on contact recreation, which is bacteria monitoring. We do that above and below each of the major CSO communities on the river. We also do metal monitoring at each of our tributaries. We do special projects. We're actually working on a PFAS project that I'd be happy to talk with you maybe at a later date for next year. And we do other special projects. But most of our monitoring is around basic parameters, basic chemistry parameters. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. And so as we look at our work, we do monitoring every other month. And we have over probably 3 decades of data. Now, some of that varies. For instance, for bromide, we have about 17 years of data. But we can look at that data and we can actually understand what's happening at the Allegheny and the Mon, the headwaters of the river, right at the start of the Ohio River. And then we can also look at what's happening at New Cumberland. One of the things I'm trying to work with my team is starting to produce trend information. And so we can take our bi-monthly data. Our goal is to produce 5-year trends. And so as we talk about the petrochemical industry and trying to understand how that might be impacting the river, that's one of our major tools. And so we're going to be able to produce data that lets us really know what's happening where the tribs enter the Ohio, and then also at the lower locks and dams. And so with that data, things like TDS, total dissolved solids, salts, total organic carbon, bromide, and all the basic water chemistry parameters that we monitor for, which will show up on the slide. So as I talk about the monitoring we do, and I mentioned TDS and mentioned TOC and bromide, I would show you the monitoring locations that we do. It gives you a snapshot of all the locations on the river that we have monitoring data for, and you can find that on our website at www.orsanco.org, and I provide that at the end of my presentation as well. That gives us an understanding of the baseline and really an understanding into the future. And of course, ORSANCO works with our partner states, US EPA, or the many community areas that partner with us, watershed organizations, and we really try to protect the water quality of the river and provide our states with valuable data that they can use to assess the health of the river for their Clean Water Act requirements. We do a lot of source water protection work. If there's a spill in the river, we are probably involved. We have about 600 spill reports to the National Response Center every year, and my team tracks that around the clock. We work with the 30 drinking water utilities on the river. We work for monitoring if there's a spill. We'll track that spill all the way to the mouth of the Mississippi. And so working through that, when you look at source water protection, when you look at our monitoring, it does give us a pretty good benchmark for the river to really understand long-term the impacts and the health of the river. My name again is Richard Harrison. I've provided on the last slide my contact information, my email address. I'm open anytime you would like to speak with you, so please feel free to contact me directly. Again, I really appreciate the work that you're doing and the partnership that we have together to protect this great river.
Thank you, Mr. Harrison. That was great. The next presenter, who's also going to talk about water monitoring work on the Ohio River, is Melissa O'Neill of Three River Quest and West Virginia University. Miss O'Neill.
Hi everyone, this is Melissa O'Neill with the West Virginia Water Research Institute. I'm here to talk to you today about a program I manage called the Three Rivers Quest. In late 2008, we started getting a lot of calls and interest from folks in regards to higher salts or total dissolved solids being noticed along the Monongahela River. We secured funding through the USGS and began sampling in late 2009. Coincidentally, we were sampling during the period of the Dunker Creek fish kill, which I'd love to get into further, but don't really have time during this 5 minutes that I was allotted. In a nutshell, we were able to work with industry and develop a total discharge management plan, which I'm happy to report has been successful in maintaining lower TDS levels on the Monongahela River. And in fact, the river as a whole is in a much better condition than it was when we started sampling in 2009. In 2011, we became the Mon River Quest, bringing volunteers into the mix and all of the hard work that they were doing in our headwaters, monitoring tributaries. In 2012, we expanded even further, bringing on the Allegheny in Ohio, working with partners at Duquesne University, the Iron Furnace chapter of Trout Unlimited. Now we work with Red Horse Environmental for the Northern Allegheny. We had worked with Wheeling Jesuit University in the Ohio, and now we are partnering with West Liberty University to accomplish those sampling stations. Collectively, we're looking at 42 sites in the Ever Ohio River Basin, collecting an astonishing 590 river miles worth of data every month. There's an additional 27 sites that we monitor in the Northern Allegheny, and we're looking at relationships between land use and water quality. We're looking at creating mass balances, looking at different sections of the river and trying to identify where the major loadings are coming in and who are the biggest contributors. We're also providing our data for climate change research, and we're able to accomplish this all through the great partnerships that we have. Looking at it on a geographic scale, we're sampling all the way up to New York, covering Western Pennsylvania, and our partners collectively work with different watershed groups in the area. We have a waters database that folks can enter their field data or their data logger data into. Volunteer groups also serve as boots on the ground, letting us know whenever there's something of interest that we should look into further. For instance, the petrochemical plant in Beaver, Pennsylvania. Due to the interest of folks, we've been able to work it out in our budget to include 2 additional sites in our routine Ohio monitoring. So we have included Ohio River at Monaca, PA, and Ohio River at Montgomery, PA. And these are upstream and downstream locations of the NPDES discharge location at Outfall 001 for the petrochemical plant. The parameters that we're monitoring for that coincide with what's listed on the permit are shown in blue. And you can see that there's some overlap there between what we're including in our current monthly sampling and what is listed on the permit. There's a lot of parameters that are listed on the permit that we are not sampling for, and it really comes down to funding. We were able to squeeze this into our current budget. Our 3RQ program is currently funded through the end of this calendar year, and we're hopeful, fingers crossed, that we'll get funding for another year from Colcom Foundation to continue the work that we're doing. Additionally, we would like to be able to do some targeted studies and secure additional funding to really dive into these site locations, looking at additional parameters and being able to get a better idea of what's going on in terms of radiologicals, BTECs, and really dive in there a little bit closer. But the good news is that we are monitoring on a monthly basis, at least through the end of this calendar calendar year. And we are looking at some of the things that are listed on their permit. And of course, TDS and TSS are two big things that will indicate if there's a big difference in what's upstream versus downstream of this particular outfall. Working with volunteer groups is extremely important. They're the ears of what's happening on the ground and really let us know what's going on. There are 9,000 square miles being sampled currently with 3RQ volunteers. They're contributing actively to the waters database, that they're able to upload their field data and their data logger data and do some visualizations, and really get an idea of what's happening in their local areas. We also have roundtable meetings where we get together and discuss concerns, collaborate to try to resolve issues, and really just learn from each other. So if you're interested in contributing as a volunteer to the 3RQ Waters database, please let me know. As mentioned earlier, we rely on soft funding. So just because we're WVU or a large university doesn't mean that we just have unlimited resources to go out and do sampling. We are actively seeking funding to look further into these two locations that I mentioned earlier that we've added into our 3RQ monthly sampling, but we would be able to look at those a little bit further and look at different parameters. And if we're successful in securing those funding, we will be sure to publish that data on our website. Thank you all for your time, and I'm sure that you'll let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. O'Neill. Now we're going to hear from one of our region's best-known experts on water monitoring and water safety. At Duquesne University, he's the director of the Center for Environmental Research and a professor of environmental microbiology, Dr. John Stolz.
I'd like to thank the organizers of the Beaver Health and Safety Series for allowing me the time this evening to tell you a little bit about my research on water pollution and radioactivity related to unconventional oil and gas waste. So this is a condensate, pictures of a condensate tanks. It's a unconventional gas well in Washington County. As you can see, by the hazard placard of it both contains produced water and crude oil, and they're both toxic and flammable. However, when it goes through this tube, it becomes residual waste and can be disposed of in a variety of different methods. What's interesting is that the placard does not show that it's radioactive, and it turns out that much of the produced water from oil and gas operations, both conventional and unconventional, actually are radioactive. And this was exposed earlier this year in Justin Noble's article in Rolling Stone, America's Radioactive Secret. In it, he had some of my data in which I had analyzed some samples from Ohio, and we were able to demonstrate that indeed they had both radium-226 and radium-228. And I have to thank my colleague Dan Bain at Pitt for actually doing the analysis. But this isn't a new problem. It turns out way back in 1990, in a series of articles that Keith Snyder did in the New York Times of his investigation of wastewater associated with oil operations down in Louisiana, that indeed the stuff was radioactive. In his report, 5 to 30 times higher than the government allows to be released from nuclear power plants. Okay, some of the used equipment was generating up to 8 millirem per hour. That would be, essentially if you stood by it for 4 hours, it would have the same as much radiation as one bone X-ray. Other things, another place that he looked at in an oil field had radiation levels 20 times higher as that which was being released by a nuclear power plant 50 miles up north. The bottom line was that the oil and gas industry had managed to get some exemption so that they could save money from having to dispose of it as hazardous waste. The other issue was, and this happened to us back when oil and gas unconventional started in Pennsylvania, we were allowing the industry to bring its produced water directly to wastewater treatment plants along our three rivers. And as a result, we started seeing issues with drinking water plants downstream with trihalomethanes. Trihalomethanes are a carcinogen that is created as a byproduct of the disinfection or chlorination step in making drinking water. And as a result of that discovery that the bromide in the produced water was having an effect on this, and as a result, in 2012, this practice was discontinued. However, things started showing up shortly thereafter, and in this particular case, I got wind of that the Charleroi water treatment plant, was having troubles even in 2015. And so I wondered, was it possible that oil and gas waste could still be getting into the source water? And lo and behold, I discovered that just upstream of the Charleroi drinking water facility was the Belle Vernon wastewater treatment plant. And back in the spring of 2019, I was invited by the manager of the plant to again, get some samples and check things out. And sure enough, I was able to get some leachate from the Rostraver landfill up the road, which was taking oil and gas waste and then shipping its leachate down to the Belle Vernon plant for treatment and disposal. Well, it turned out that the landfill leachate itself was radioactive with both radium-226 and 228, but it also had high levels of bromide. Once it got to the plant could not handle it, and it turned out that they were no longer in compliance for their discharge. It was almost 3 times the permitted discharge, and it was radioactive, and it was discharging bromide into the Monongahela. Now, it doesn't look like, 1.6 milligrams per liter doesn't sound like a lot, or 20 picocuries per liter, but they were getting anywhere from 100 to 300,000 gallons per day in this leachate. And so you just have to do the math, and it adds up very quickly. The other thing was the dried sludges themselves at the end of the day at the waste treatment plant were also hot with both radium-226 and radium-228. I should also mention that the half-life for radium-226 is 1,600 years, so this radiation is not going away. Fortunately, after the restraining order was placed and they stopped shipping the leachate from the landfill to the wastewater plant, that it was back in compliance. So we definitely have evidence that it was affecting the operations at the plant. Update on the landfill. The landfill is currently under a consent order decree with the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection to basically clean up its act and properly dispose of its leachate. Unfortunately, one of the ideas is to put in an evaporator, which would reduce the volume of the leachate, but it would also increase the amount of radioactivity. So why shouldn't we allow oil and gas waste to sanitary landfills? Oil and gas waste contain toxic chemicals and are radioactive. We're allowing it to take up to 80% volume per day. The analysis that we've done shows that it's definitely the leachate from the landfill, sanitary landfill, has now got the characteristics typical for oil and gas brine and is also radioactive. The proposed treatment for the leachate would concentrate this radioactivity to over 60 million picocuries of radium. And of course, radium decays to radon, so now there's the potential of having radon contamination in the landfill. So basically, public waste treatment plants receiving this leachate are affected, discharging radioactivity and bromide into locals, rivers, and streams, and the waste sludge is also radioactive. And basically, again, downstream drinking water facilities are bearing the consequences with compliance issues with disinfectant, byproduct, and trihalomethanes. So to summarize all this, and this is a wonderful diagram from the folks at the Center for Coalfield Justice, but basically, once again, oil and gas wastes are getting into our sources of drinking water. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Stolz. Now we're going to hear from someone with expertise in working directly with the Water Authority, the entity that's responsible for treating water before it gets into the taps in our homes. Robert Steffes is the Vice Chairman of the Board of Directors for the Municipal Water Authority of Aliquippa. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, I'm Rob Steffes. I'm a board member of the Municipal Water Authority of Aliquippa, which is a publicly owned and operated water and sewage utility in Beaver County. So I'm here today to talk to you about water, specifically tap water. So let me give you a quick rundown about how water systems work. Our source water comes from wells that are dug along the Ohio River. These wells are over 80 feet deep and have lateral channels that go way underneath the riverbed to draw our source water, which is actually a lot cleaner than if we drew it from the channel itself, which is the way that a lot of water utilities around here do it. Now, from the wells, we pump it to a sewer treatment or a water treatment plant, which is a facility that was built by the old J&L steel mill way back in the 50s to provide softened water for their boilers, and only secondarily to provide drinking water to the community. That plant was not designed to meet any of today's water quality standards, and it doesn't, which is why we're actually in the process of building a brand new state-of-the-art water plant. Now, from the plant, filtered and chlorinated water is distributed through 50 odd miles of old leaky water mains, wherein we lose perhaps 40% of our water. What water does make it down to drains is often mixed with a lot of extraneous stormwater and winds its way through our old and leaky sewer lines to our sewer treatment plant, where it's cleansed, sanitized, and returned to the river. Now, the point I'm trying to make is that our system is very typical of water plants throughout the state of Pennsylvania and throughout the country, which is to say old, neglected, and way past their design lives. The EPA has estimated it's going to take, over the next 20 years, $660 billion for this country to upgrade and renovate its water systems. Our plant alone that we're going to build is going to cost us upwards of $15 million. So, do you have to worry about the safety of your drinking water? And the answer is yes, and the answer is no. On the one hand, water systems like ours are highly regulated by the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. And we do a lot of testing to make sure there's no pathogens in that water. On the other hand, we only test for a few of the potentially hazardous chemicals that seem to be making their way into our waterways, into our groundwater. And it seems to me that there's a lot of economic and political pressure to keep it that way. And I'll give you an example. Last year, the town of Belle Vernon, which is just upstream on the Mon River, the Pennsylvania DEP was urging the sewer treatment plant there to accept drilling wastewater from a landfill that was actually killing the microbes in the plant and causing it to fail. And the board and the staff had to actually get a court order to stop it. So, the Pennsylvania Constitution affirms your right to clean water. But like any other right, it's only as viable as the public's willingness to defend it. Keep in mind that the Pennsylvania DEP itself is actually grossly underfunded and grossly understaffed. So, my advice is pay attention to your public water source and your public water utilities. Attend a board meeting, find out what's going on, become a board member, because water is way too important to neglect. So, to your health.
Thank you, Mr. Steffes. As someone who drinks Aliquippa water, I appreciate what you do. Many of you watching may have questions on what you as individual residents can do to take action in order to protect our waters. Here to help us understand the many opportunities for citizen action is Mr. Eric Carter of Mountain Watershed Association.
I'm Eric Harder, and I'm your Youghiogheny Riverkeeper. I work for Mountain Watershed Association. We are dedicated to clean water, and our focus is on the Youghiogheny River. We also work on regional and global initiatives and collaborate with many organizations on issues like climate change, polluter accountability, and the lack of enforcement of NIPD's permits and the Clean Water Act. In terms of water quality monitoring, we have a very active program to assess the quality of our streams and rivers. We collect water samples to monitor the impacts over time of coal mines in operation, abandoned mine discharges, landfills, sewage treatment systems, and drinking water sources. We have our own bacteria analysis lab where we can measure E. coli at very common swimming locations throughout the watershed. And volunteer work is very important for many nonprofit organizations, including Mountain Watershed. And this involves citizen water quality monitoring. Due to capacity, logistics, and costs, utilizing citizen monitoring can be very beneficial for organization initiatives. ALARM, which is the Alliance for Aquatic Resource Monitoring, is an organization we've worked with in the past. They host workshops to help establish and train volunteer monitoring networks. The workshops typically include background information about water chemistry, establishing a program, standard operating procedures, and a closer view regarding a current or upcoming threat to the water quality in their area. Our workshop that we co-hosted with ALARM was focused on potential impacts from the Falcon pipeline, and topics covered were drinking water supplies and possible interactions with pipeline construction activities, construction sequencing, violation examples, so basically what to look for, how to determine if sediment is in the waterway, and how to properly report a violation. Our hopes are that a citizen can be an active participant in protecting their home, their favorite creek, or their community, for example, the Ambridge Reservoir. These workshops can be tailored to cover many different types of land disturbance and resource extraction activities. MWA is a member organization of Waterkeeper Alliance. As for now, there are over 300 waterkeepers across the globe, and we work collectively on waterkeeper campaigns, which include Clean Water Defense, Clean and Safe Energy, and Pure Farms, Pure Water. Currently, we are fighting a proposed natural gas-fired power plant along the Yaak River. This involves rezoning of residential areas to industrial, and the project is abutting environmental justice areas. Waterkeepers are required to patrol their waterways, and this means being present on the water, tracking sources of pollution, reviewing permits, etc. We've been monitoring a discharge point from a hazardous waste landfill located in Westmoreland County. This facility has received several violations of lack of compliance and continues to have issues properly treating their discharge. As waterkeepers, we are encouraged to participate in other initiatives like bacteria monitoring, hosting volunteer river cleanups, and promoting recreation. Our river cleanup campaign has successfully removed nearly 1,000 tires from the river. Creating a sense of trust is important when discussing very impactful projects, and river cleanups are a great tool for that. Currently, microplastics and nurdles are a hot topic in the environmental world. The recent push to expand petrochemical manufacturing in our region may change the entire landscape for Southwest Pennsylvanians and other Upper Ohio watershed communities. The Beaver cracker plant will most certainly bring an increase in the amount of nurdles in the Ohio River, and this is the first of what sounds like several new petrochemical build-out projects in our region, including storage, processing, and production. We are working with other groups in the Ohio River Basin to monitor nurdles, which is the small plastic pellet that the cracker plant will produce, and this will be a first for us. At the same time, we'll be looking at other microplastics. Baseline data collection, or data before the waterway is impacted by a project, will begin this fall throughout the Upper Ohio watershed. This includes the Yaak, the Mon, the Allegheny, and the Ohio. We do plan on using volunteer citizen science to increase engagement, increase awareness, and provide science-based information that the public can trust. Some of this data will be collected using do-it-yourself sampling equipment that volunteers will learn how to make using simple items. This smaller Upper Ohio group will then share the results with the Nurdle Patrol, which is an international nurdle initiative made up of citizen scientists, institutions, and professional water quality specialists. In other terms, our volunteer network will participate in a larger volunteer network across the globe. That's all I have to share for now. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, Mr. Harder. And finally, before we start our question and answer, we're going to hear a legislative update. from Pennsylvania Representative Sara Innamorato. She's going to talk about how our policymakers in Harrisburg are working to protect our water through legislation and other tools. Representative Innamorato.
Hello, everyone. It's State Representative Sara Innamorato. I have a few minutes to provide you with the legislative update, so I am going to be quick and as least depressing as possible. So as you may have read this summer, the governor signed into law HB 732, which is a reprise of HB 1100, which is the tax credit program for petrochemicals. After that was signed into law, I began working on a bill with one of my colleagues on the eastern side of the state, Representative Kyle Mullins, on a community host agreement bill, which would essentially require these industries to enter into an agreement with the host municipality, and there would be, a bevy of requirements that would be decided democratically by the people who live there. And it would give them some legal recourse if that facility did not uphold their end of the bargain. So trying to, do what we can, given the current climate of Harrisburg. The other more reassuring thing that we saw this summer was the release of the Attorney General's grand jury report, which essentially said that the Department of Health and the Department of Environmental Protection failed to protect the people of the Commonwealth from the fracking industry. It's a very large report, so if you want to sit back and read it, go ahead. But at the end, there is a series of policy recommendations, and myself and some of our colleagues are working on those, on crafting those pieces of legislation. We hope to package them and promote them starting in 2021 when we're back in session. But really, what our office has been working on primarily has been issues of radioactivity in waste. About a year ago, it was brought to my attention what was going on in Bell Vernon, and I began speaking to a number of experts in that area and finding out where our gaps in our regulatory environment are. So the way that we wanted to handle that problem is really to bring together a table of experts and folks who have been impacted by this. So the past 9 months, we've been meeting with scientists, community members, folks who have worked in the regulatory environment, policymakers, environmental lawyers, and we have a number of pieces of legislation that are ready to go. And really what they do is close the hazardous waste loophole. Right now, there is a special carve out for the oil and gas industry when it comes to regulating their waste. And because they do not need to test for things that other heavy industry would have to test for, they can dispose of them in municipal landfills, which then could create a climate where folks are being exposed unnecessarily to the toxic material that's used in the fracking process and the naturally occurring radioactive material that's extracted from the ground when we extract shale gas. We saw in New York, in the signing into law, a very similar bill in New York State, which was reassuring. So we've been talking to them. And, so far we have a few dozen co-sponsors on the bill. So, it is gaining momentum. We are educating at least the Democratic caucus on this issue. And we'll be doing that a little bit more at a public policy hearing that we're hosting on October 14th at 2 p.m. If you are interested in attending or listening to that recording, you can email me at sinnamorato@pahouse.net and make sure you get a link to that. It will also be streaming live on YouTube. That's all I have for now. I look forward to taking any questions and continuing the dialogue. Thank you all for the hard work that you're doing. On the outside, you deserve elected representatives that are working equally as hard on the inside. So thanks for inviting me, and I look forward to our conversation.
Thank you, Representative Innamorato. And thank you to all of our guests tonight for your excellent presentations. We're now going to begin the live part of our program. And so I'm going to start by welcoming all the panelists into the discussion. And we've got a lot of questions. And so the first couple of questions are actually one panelist to another. And so this first question is for Mr. Harrison, and it's from Dr. Stolz. What is your level of detection for bromide, and do you test for lithium?
We test bromide at parts per million, and I misspoke when I said 17 years. It's actually 7 years of data. Bromide is one of the items that we added recently through our partnership with our drinking water utilities. They have expressed concern with increasing levels of bromide in the river, and we do not test for lithium. And I tried to start my video. Okay, there we go. Thanks.
You're on
controls. That's awesome. Thank
there
you.
you go. There you go.
Are we allowed to comment?
Who is that?
That's me. Stolz.
Oh, go ahead.
No, the reason why I'm interested in lithium, we've just published, my lab and colleagues have just published a series of papers where we use what's called mass ratio analysis. So if we have lithium, magnesium, calcium, strontium, barium, and a number of other parameters, it allows us to kind of parse whether or not something is from mine drainage or conventional gas or unconventional oil and gas. And it's a first step into kind of deciphering this stuff. And, you know, part of the issues that we've faced is that a lot of times the companies, they'll you know, the public, not public, but, you know, commercial lab tests aren't at the level of sensitivity that we really need. Because, again, it's not a question of whether it's there, but, you know, what are the different ratios? You know, what is the comparison of lithium, say, to bromide and things like that. So it's very informative. And so you can wean a lot more information from the data that you already have.
I made a note of that, and really, you know, I didn't talk a lot about ORSANCO, and I won't do so now. We have 20 full-time staff. We're down from about 30. We're at 1976 staffing levels. I'm really proud of our incredible group. We have 12 scientists. We travel up and down the 1,000-mile river. We do all of those programs with that group. I have about a 27-year background in drinking water. I was a vice president of a large water utility in the Cincinnati area for that period of time, and have a passion for source water protection. It was really what attracted me to ORSANCO, and I believe helped lead to my hiring at ORSANCO was that background. And so certainly as we look at our monitoring strategy and try to balance our work, some of these additional compounds are important. We do focus on basic parameters. And again, a lot of it has to do with meeting the current regulated contaminants. There was a question about PFAS. We are embarking on a really incredible PFAS project next year. Whole different discussion. I don't want to monopolize the discussion. I'm partnering with Melissa and Neil. We have a great working relationship. We've been working together for, gosh, over a couple of years now, trying to compare notes and work together on that project.
Thank you. The next question is also from one panelist to another. This is also from Dr. Stolz. This is to Mr. Steffes. Have you thought about taking the sludge and generating methane to fuel your facility? Multi-stage digesters can use the sludge at the end of the waste treatment process and can be amended with additional compostable waste. Hermitage, Pennsylvania has such a facility.
Yeah, well, give me an example. The sludge that we generate at our sewer treatment plant gets put into what we call reed beds. As a matter of fact, the last board meeting, we just spent over $70,000 to haul it to a landfill. So yeah, we're kind of interested in doing something like that, because the other option is to take that kind of sludge and turn it into something that could be useful, let's say put on a landfill or something like that, something that doesn't have heavy metals and other toxic waste in it. That's an expensive process to get it done. I looked into it, and it's hard given the fact that, you know, we're under-resourced and we don't have a lot of money. So to try and convince the rest of the board members and the rest, we have so many things that we got to fix, that this is something that, wow, you know, we'd love to do it, but where's the money going to come from? And it's hard to convince our ratepayers in Aliquippa to pay for this. You know, when we have so many other problems that we got to fix, just basic problems. So that's where we're at.
Okay, thank you. I've got a question for Ms. O'Neill. Do you collaborate with Marcellus Shale impact groups at Pitt and George Washington University? If so, how?
I should have clarified whenever I mentioned our partners earlier, being Duquesne University, West Liberty, and Wheeling Jesuit. Those are our funded partners with the program, so they're formally part of 3RQ in terms of we subcontract funding out to them so that they can perform the sampling that we consider our routine network sampling. We do frequently partner with other organizations in terms of collaborative efforts. The PA Water Center, we're involved with them. Data sharing, we've got a waters database that anybody can contribute to. So at some level, we've probably contributed and collaborated with them previously, but there's not a formal, you know, fundable relationship.
Thank you. There's a question about funding for PFAS work, and I'm not sure who to direct it to. The question is, have you had success in finding funding for PFAS work? And so I'm going to punt this to Dr. Stolz, Mr. Harrison, Ms. O'Neill, and anybody else who wants to take it.
Well, I can talk from ORSANCO and Ohio River's perspective. We made it a priority over the last couple of years to build a very unique project for the Ohio River. We're looking at two flow conditions, and we're actually doing a unique high level of technology approach to sample the river. It takes us, our crews, a 3% crew, about a day to do one sample. We're approaching this from a probabilistic standpoint, and we're going to cover the entire 1,000 miles of the river on a 50-mile basis. And so we're also working with River Quest on a site on the Allegheny and the Mon. So it was limited funding. It was federal funding, U.S. EPA Clean Water Act funding to member states. And they then allowed us to use some of that funding to do a special project. I'm hoping we can do this every 5 years. We will have a great benchmark assessment for about 40 PFAS chemicals. We're partnering with US EPA and USGS on this. It's a very unique project. And again, I expect to do this next spring and next fall. So we'll have results probably a little over from a year from now. It's going to give us a great baseline.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to take that, Ms. O'Neill?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can jump in just real quick. We did receive a little bit of funding through USGS because PFAS was identified through our West Virginia Water Advisory Council as a parameter of interest that we should look into. With the small amount of funding that we received, we had hoped to be able to go out and do some sample collection through grab methods at our 3RQ stations. But the complexity of the sample collection led us over to Richard and the ORSANCO folks. And rather than basically wasting money grabbing samples, whenever that's not a method that's really gone through the gauntlet yet in terms of how solid the data results are. Instead, we're partnering with ORSANCO so that we can have them collect a site on the Allegheny and a site on the Monongahela using their tested methods and everything so that we've got a really solid, valid data set to be able to contribute. So there's not a lot of funding out there that I've seen in terms of opportunities to apply for that are monitoring related PFAS at this point. So it'll get there. It's just not there yet from what I've seen.
Thank you. Dr. Stolz, have you had luck finding funding?
I have to unmute, sorry. Well, I'm not working on PFAS at this point, but as far as the other, I've been very fortunate through Hines and COCOM and Park now, because everyone is really interested in this landfill issue. And it turns out, for instance, why I got the Park Foundation funding is because even though New York has a ban on fracking, they're taking our waste. And there are at least 3 landfills that have taken significant quantities of oil and gas waste. And so we have a project, again, COVID's put us back a few months, but you know, we're planning on this fall going up to New York and getting samples because it's just, it's another one of those things. If you don't know about it, you're not thinking about it. And I don't blame, you know, the waste treatment plants. I don't blame the landfills because they were told the stuff is perfectly safe and it's revenue. I mean, early on, back in 2010, I visited the McKeesport waste treatment plant and they were over the moon. They were looking at almost $2 million in new revenue, not realizing that what they were doing was jeopardizing every drinking water facility downstream. So again, you know, you've got to pick your battles and you know, try to get funding.
Thank you. Don't go away. I've got another question for you.
Okay.
So you mentioned that New York is taking some of our waste. Where does dried sludge waste go? Like, is it spread on farms? Is it dumped in rivers? Like, what happens to it?
Well, essentially, and again, I think Rob might be able to answer that more appropriately, but either it's dried and brought to landfill, or it's dried and Alcosan often incinerates it. And then in some cases, as long as the pathogen load and heavy metal load is down, it's used as fertilizer. But again, not to be self-promoting, this whole idea of doing biodigestion actually gets, you know, it lowers the pathogen load and essentially takes that sludge at the end of the day and generates methane, which can then be used to fuel and turn into electricity. So Hermitage, for example, has got their waste treatment plant. When I visited back in 2017, they were producing 75% of the energy. There was a couple of places I visited in Ohio. They're producing, the one landfill's producing more than enough and is actually helping to export electricity to the the drinking water plant. So again, there's alternatives that we can do, and again, the worst thing that you want to do is take that sludge to landfill because it's not being used appropriately or more, you know, sustainably.
Thank you. My next question is for Mr. Harrison. There is a request for information regarding upcoming ORSANCO meetings and whether or not they're going to be virtual options for joining.
Absolutely, and I feel like I have such a wealth of information to share and not have the time. So I really appreciate Robin bringing that up. Robin's a great partner with us. So we have a watershed organization group that's very active in helping advise the commission and offer some pretty pointed comment from time to time. And we do have a commission meeting coming up, and we are offering that virtually. When I say a commission meeting, that's an understatement. It's actually Tuesday afternoon from 1 p.m. till 4 p.m., and that's Eastern time. And it's Wednesday morning from 9 a.m. to noon. That is our technical committee. And so we will go through a wealth of information. I'll be presenting on a really, really awesome effort to develop an Ohio River Basin restoration strategy that really will include a lot of work on the Ohio River, And then we'll have discussions about source water protection, our bacteria monitoring program, our PFAS project, really all of our monitoring. And I'll be on the chat. So if any folks have any questions, I'll work with you, give me my cell phone number, and would welcome you all to participate. Just get on our website, orsanco.org, under news. We request that you register, and then you'll get a direct email with a link. That way we can manage participation, and we've had great success with that in June, really having a lot of folks that normally don't get to travel and participate. So thanks, Robin, for pointing that out.
Thank you. There's a comment and a question for Representative Innamorato. Comment is, thank you very much for speaking out about these environmental issues. And the question is, how do you manage to do that when so many of our elected representatives seem unwilling to do that?
Good evening. Thank you so much for the question. I don't know. I feel like it's my moral obligation because this is something that impacts all of us. I represent the 21st District, which is Pittsburgh and Northern Allegheny County. So I'm more in an urban, suburban area, but the decisions I make in Harrisburg impact all of our lives. And I really love this Wendell Berry quote where he says, do unto those downstream as you would have those upstream do unto you. And so when we're thinking about policy making and where the gaps are, we have to take a holistic view. And, you know, even while we're having this dialogue around water and as it relates to oil and gas waste, we're really touching on points of like austerity and what, starving our public coffers and not investing in our public sector has done and has gotten us to this place where we now have infrastructure that is failing us when we desperately need it, because we have this almost overabundance of private industry that is now not responsible for their waste, and it's falling on us in the public sector to manage it. And so, I think it's just a lot of connecting the dots. And I think what really keeps me fueled and engaged is working with people who are experts like Dr. John Stolz. When I was mentioning the table of people who I've worked with, he's there and he's been able to bring the scientific perspective for me. And it's been able to work with organizers like Veronica at Center for Coalfield Justice, because she works with real human beings who are neighbors who are impacted, again, by these decisions. So it's really been working with the community in a variety of ways to identify the problems, and then using the tools and infrastructure that exists for us inside the halls of Harrisburg to start to draft legislation that can be change making. And that's only phase one. Moving that legislation does require the political will and political courage to do that with my colleagues, but it also requires all of us to engage with our local elected officials and our state level officials and tell them that, this is what I want at the top of the priority list when we start a new session in 2021.
Thank you. I've got a question for Mr. Harder. How would you characterize the culture in the Waterkeepers Alliance? And what does it mean to you to hold the responsibility of the Waterkeeper title?
Well, Waterkeeper Alliance, excuse me, my children are playing, but it started a long time ago, and with the amount of work that has been completed by Waterkeepers, just to be able to try to live up to some of that would, apologize. However, just having a long list of waterkeepers that I can look to, not only for help, but for inspiration. I think there's been so many successes based on waterkeeper kind of movement and the branding that goes along with it. So apologize for the interruption there.
It's okay. It's real. The next question is for Ms. O'Neill. What options exist for 24/7, 365 water monitoring? Air monitors can sample every 80 seconds. Is there any hope for near real-time monitoring to be deployed anytime soon?
So a lot of organizations do deploy data loggers. Commonly, they'll collect conductivity, temperature, level. If you're looking to get those live to where they're live streaming, it can be pretty pricey. And the best bet would be to try to develop a partnership with USGS to get within their network. There are USGS gauges all throughout the Upper Ohio River Basin. And, you know, that you could look at the closest one to see if there are any obvious impacts at any certain time.
Thank you. I've got a question for Mr. Harrison. What powers do you have as ORSANCO versus, say, the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection? And are there other agencies with power over the water in our region?
Excuse me. We are an interstate compact authority. We do have extensive powers within our compact as it relates to water quality. However, we are an organization of our member states. And so we are formed by our member states, and we have really reached a point where we focus a lot on the science of the river, and the states really focus on the regulatory components. As I mentioned, we have 12 scientists. I can't recall if I count myself as one as a professional engineer. I guess it depends on the day and what I'm doing, but very great staff, but very limited. And so our focus is on monitoring and assessment. We provide the data for our member states to use to meet their Clean Water Act requirements. And we do work with the states to set water quality standards for the Ohio River, but those are all enforced, implemented by the states, and really US EPA and the states focus on that component. And that was really a big deal. We went through about a 4-year process where we reviewed our standards. And yeah, again, that's a whole nother presentation, but it comes down to the Clean Water Act and states and US EPA working collaboratively. We have a part to play in that, particularly with our science. We do have a lot of authority within our compact. However, that authority is really at the pleasure of our states, of our commission, if that makes sense. And so we really work with them very closely.
Thank you. And the next question, I'm not sure who to direct it to. Maybe Dr. Stolz? If you don't know the answer, feel free to pass. How is frac brine and produced water being disposed of in Pennsylvania?
Well, there's multiple things, and the first is that they try and re-inject. So essentially, they use a lot of a significant volume is actually re-injected in new wells. However, as you might imagine, the produced water continues to be produced by these wells until they're plugged, and so now with the downturn, they're not doing as much. So now they have to figure out other ways. Another situation is when it's really, toxic and they can't reuse it. They're using injection wells. But again, the third option, which is the one that, kind of got me started and it's one of those things when you find out, you're like, is this, you've got to be kidding me. They're bringing it to landfill. So even though it's liquid and it's a brine, it's legally, they can take these liquids as long as they immobilize them. And I visited both, I haven't visited the plant in Rostraver, but I did visit a landfill in Wayne Township in Clinton County. And, they were over the moon. They actually, one of their facilities makes wood chips, and then they use the waste wood chips to absorb the brine, and then that's put into the landfill. And, so that you could just imagine when it rains, it soaks through and all that other stuff, but they don't have to, necessarily test for certain things in the leachate that's produced. So again, the three options are using it to frack another well, injection wells, especially in Ohio, and then the third option is bringing it to landfill.
Thank you. I've got another question, and I'm not sure who to direct it to. I'm going to try to give it to Mr. Steffes. If you don't know the answer, feel free to pass. What would the economic impact be on operators or treatment facilities of lowering the bacterial limits during non-recreation season, October to April? Basically bringing the level down from 2,000 MPN to 200 MPN year-round. Many southern states already have one limit.
Well, for recreational use, I really couldn't have it.
Yeah, I understand there's two different acceptable limits. One runs October to April and one runs April to October. That's what it sounds like from the question. Mr. Harder, this is your question. You take it.
Sure. Lots of NIPD's permits will have, in Pennsylvania, for instance, two levels, one for the recreation swimming season. So during May through September, you'll have one limit of 200 MPN, which is a number of bacteria colonies. And then after that swim season is over, a wastewater treatment plant can then discharge up to 2,000 MPN, which is obviously a lot more. And it's based on the fact that it's presumed that no one's recreating in the streams or waterways anymore. And what benefit does a facility, a treatment facility, and an operator get by upping that to 2,000? And would it make a large impact on their operation costs to have one limit year round, which would then be more protective for public health? Which might not have an answer. It might just be too hard to grasp of an actual dollar amount. But is it worth, having that raised limit, or does it provide some kind of benefit for the facility to have to, draw back a little bit? Or is there a way that we could stress for a regulation change to move that limit to a safer year-round limit?
And this is Richard Harrison. I don't have a direct answer to that, but I think I can add a little bit of information. We have worked hard over the last 20 years. We developed a rich suite of data, particularly during the recreation season from April to October. We monitor above and below the 6 largest CSO communities. And really, a lot of it has to do with combined sewer overflows. And so in a lot of cases, until those are addressed, the treatment plants don't have the capacity to be able to remove the bacteria, to have it settle through their sludge removal process. And so it's a much more difficult question than that. A lot of the communities are involved in that work. And what I can say is we've done some trends analysis, and we've seen a lot of improvement over the last couple of decades, particularly as we get to higher flows. But when you talk about climate change, when you talk about more intensity, it really gets complicated. But it's not I'm not answering your question directly, but it's not a real simple answer, because there's a lot more involved with that.
Thank you. A question for Dr. Stolz. What do you think about the safety of fracture fluid storage ponds? Does a cover make a difference? Can they be prohibited? I don't know if that means the cover or the fracture storage pond.
Well, again,
probably the storage pond.
Yeah, no, I mean, right now the state is still allowing for open impoundments. With Act 78 or Chapter 78, they tried to prohibit open impoundments for recycling, but it's been challenged in court. As far as I know, I mean, that's one of those things that's really hard to track. But if all you have to do is go up in an airplane, and you can see that they may not be the old swimming pool liners in an open pit, but now they're above ground swimming pools. And so this is an issue. And of course we've done some my group has done some air analysis around the condensate tanks, and there's volatile organics and toxins, BTEX, acetone, you name it. You can find it in these facilities that are or storage facilities that are being used for recycled produced water. The other issue is even the tanks themselves, when they are enclosed, they have release valves that, as the fluids and the pressure build up in the tank, it's released into the air. So yeah, these open impoundments and even some of the storage tanks are sources of nasty volatiles.
Thank you. A question for Mr. Steffes. You encourage people to go to board meetings and get involved with their water quality. Why do you recommend spending not just tax money, but also citizens' time in getting engaged? What impact can a citizen have on the outcome?
Well, these municipal water systems are publicly owned and operated, and they depend on people like me who live in the community and use the water to govern the boards, set the directions. Otherwise, in private water authorities, you don't have any control over it. We set the rates. We just determine which way to go. We decide whether to borrow money, how we're going to fix up the plant, and that's very much of a local thing. And we often have difficulties when there's a board opening just to find anybody who want to sit on it. So really, it's this how an open democratic society is supposed to work. If people don't step up and offer their services, then how's it going to get done? That's why. So, and if nobody's paying attention, I guarantee you things will go wrong, because that's happened in the past.
Thank you. A question for anyone. Do you recommend citizens get a whole house water filter?
Well, if I could answer for that one, I don't know that it's necessary. If you're really sensitive to chemicals in the water, then perhaps, but they're very expensive. You can get a reverse osmosis water filter. Costs maybe $225. You have to replace the filters every year for your drinking water, and that it takes everything out of the water, including chlorine and anything else you might be worried about. I find that's be adequate for most people using municipal water, and if you're getting water out of a well, that would be the way to go. This is inexpensive. It's not a lot of effort, and I can guarantee you're going to get good water.
Thank you.
Whole house, too much, I think.
Okay, thanks. A question for Ms. O'Neill. How much additional funding is necessary to test for all of the substances in Shell's NPDES permit?
That's a great question. It would probably take quite a lot of money to sample for all of the parameters that are listed. And then you have to determine what routine schedule you're going to test on. So is it something that you're wanting to do on a weekly basis or a monthly basis or quarterly basis? But I can't give a straight answer because I haven't put together a cost estimate for all of the chemicals or all of the parameters, that are on their list.
Thank you. A question for, let's see, I guess Mr. Harder. How can citizens get involved in tracking nurdles in the water? And then if you'd be willing to discuss Mountain Watershed Association's program, that'd be great.
Sure. Nurdle monitoring is kind of new. The Nurdle Patrol is a organization even led by a campus in Texas who basically sends out kits to collect nurdles, and that kit will allow you to record data, time and place and conditions, what kind of waterway.
And
You know
so
what, if you can I'm sorry, if you can explain what a nurdle is, that would be great. I just realized that not everybody might know what that is.
Sure. A nurdle is basically a processed pellet that the Beaver cracker plant will eventually produce. So a lot of times people are talking about microplastics in the waterway. And so this is just a type of microplastic, although nurdles are much more prevalent when you're around, say, the Beaver cracker plant. In times of transport, if you think about a grain facility or place that transports corn or any kind of grain, how much of that material spills out when they are loading the railways. This is kind of a typical practice for these nurdles as well, as they're just kind of lost in the manufacturing. So they do end up in our waterways. One thing that we can do is track them, whether it's with a large global organization. The Nurdle Patrol has that set up where they'll send you a kit. They send you operating procedures on how to do the sampling, and then some social media help where you can broadcast your kind of messaging and campaign, and then send that data back to their lab, and they kind of do some more processing from there. There you go. Mark Dixon throws up a little wiki link for what nurdles entail and what microplastics are all about. But with our system, basically, we're kind of new to the nurdle sampling, and a lot of other water keepers have done this, especially on the coast. And so we're basically going to piggyback on some of their guidance, and we had a local machine shop build our sampler because they are kind of expensive. And so we'll be doing that for the baseline data, like I kind of talked about in the video, basically in between every lock and dam on the Ohio, to get just kind of a good grasp on what's happening. And then to utilize that citizen engagement, we've already had a lot of volunteers sign up to either go out onto the baseline sampling tours or to get their own kind of section of their river, whether they're in Ohio, Pennsylvania, on the Allegheny or whatever. We can kind of set them up with a little protocol and really have that as a collaborative effort. So I think that's the biggest part about nurdles and microplastics is the strength of the public engagement aspect of it, and how many people don't really want to get involved in some of our maybe oil and gas labeled topics, but when they hear about microplastics, then they'll jump right in. So again, it's a way to increase engagement with people that may have a touchier time with handling some of the topics. But I threw my email and website into the chat, but Eric is eric@mtwatershed.com. And we'll be doing our baseline sampling at the end of October, and pretty much quarterly doing that as well, at the same time rolling out that volunteer system.
Thank you. This is a general question because I'm not sure who would be the best person to ask. I've been reading that the intensity of the COVID virus can be measured in sewer waste in any given municipality, even college campus sewer systems. Is this level of testing happening anywhere in Western Pennsylvania?
I mean, I can speak to state legislation that's proposed. I don't know if it's happening at any municipal waste site, but there is a bill introduced by the minority chair of the Commerce Committee, Representative Rob Matsey, that would design this system, essentially have wastewater treatment plants who already are required to do sampling. It would require a portion of that sample to be sent to a database at the state that would then be tested for the COVID virus. And it would feed into the CDC database that they are currently building out. So I don't know if that needs to be enabled at a state for the municipalities and the wastewater treatment plants at that level to participate. That I'm unsure of, but I know that there is a proposal at the state level. It has yet to be come up for consideration though.
Thank you for that.
I can, this
go
is
ahead.
Richard. I can comment that is happening. We coordinate with the Office of Research and Development for US EPA, their Cincinnati labs, and I do know they have research projects going on with Cincinnati MSD in that area. I'm not familiar with whether they're doing that anywhere else up and down the river, but that's certainly actively being researched on the Ohio River.
Thank you. And then there's a question about, I think this is for Mr. Steffes. What can local water authorities do to protect their water, and how does the DEP source water protection program work?
Well, we actually, it's voluntary, and we actually signed up for it 5-6 years ago. It's a great program because there's actually funding for it, and it gets the public involved. And they basically, a firm is hired and that does this. They go out and they examine all the possible contamination sites that could impact our source water wells. And so since it's voluntary, a lot of authorities don't even know about it and don't do it. I know Ambridge, we try to encourage them to do it, which would be really helpful since they have an open reservoir for their water. And I know they want to put a pipeline right past their watershed, so it would behoove them to get involved in this sort of thing. But like I say, it's a no-brainer. I think we got like $30,000 in testing and research to make sure that our wells don't have any contamination points that we should worry about. So,
thank you. And a question for Ms. O'Neill. Have you looked into automated drone sampling or robotic options for sampling?
The short of that would be no. We did have a couple of meetings a few years ago with the WV robotics team in regards to having some auto samplers that could go out and do some automated sample collection. We have had a relationship with, I can't think of the name of the thing right now, but there is a device that was, I think, developed by Carnegie Mellon. I don't know why my mind is blank right now whenever it comes to the name of the little robot, but it was something that you could send out and have it collect samples from. It didn't work as well in rivers, but it worked pretty well on lakes and ponds. But for our sampling that we do on a routine basis, we don't deploy any sort of robotic or drones. The drones, I think, would be really complicated in terms of permissions to be able to fly drones in to collect samples. I'd probably have to talk to our general counsel if we wanted to get into drone sampling.
All right, thank you. And we have time for one more question, and this is actually for all of our panelists. Name one thing that residents can do to make sure their water supply is safe and free from toxic chemicals. Go.
Talk to your water authority. I mean, I want to give a shout out to Rob because when I was part of that Ambridge initial effort to, do one of these water groups, and I was really impressed with what Aliquippa had done. And the whole point is it's our water, everybody's involved, and you guys are doing the best you can with the modest resources that you have. So, I'm sure you're happy when people reach out to you and say, hey, how's it going? Is there something we can do to help? So that's what I would recommend. And just, keep an eye on things. Read your reports that they send out. Oh.
Yeah, we send them out every year, and it tells exactly what we do test for and what we find in the water and whether we're in compliance or not. Again, it's, if the public pays any attention at all to it, it makes a big difference. And for instance, with PFAS testing, we're not required to do it. We did do it, but it's extremely expensive. It costs over $5,000 to do one round of testing. So, all this is a big drag on the ratepayers. So, again, looking to our representatives in government, we're going to need some help funding this stuff. If you want to get this stuff done, you know, you can put all the requirements on us you want. You say test for this, test for that. It costs a lot of money to do it. And, you know, we're certainly going to need a helping hand from the government to do it. And we want to do it, but if we're not required to do it, it's a tough sell.
And I might weigh in, putting on my 27 years as a water utility professional. Whenever we would have a rate increase, the only thing we would hear from were folks that did not want the investment. And then we would lay out the investment in treatment and infrastructure. And it seemed like a lot of the advocacy that occurred just fell silent when it came time for a rate increase. And all the folks that make decisions here is that there shouldn't be anything. And so, you know, the advocacy is great, but it needs to be heard on the tough times. And this Consumer Confidence Report, the annual report that is required, the Safe Drinking Water Act, provides a lot of great information. And reach out to your labs, reach out to your utilities. They will talk to you about the water quality. They field those calls. So there's a lot of information out there. US EPA has an ECHO database where you can research whether there's been any regulatory challenges with your utilities. So there's a lot of information out there if you look.
I'm going to give a shout out to your local watershed organization. I think it's really important that those are member-led organizations, and your voice, I think, is one way that can be led. And obviously there's great work being done at institution and obviously a lot of different levels of science, but I think you're going to see that getting involved with your watershed organization is going to have some great payoff and great opportunity for you to volunteer, which is all about the feeling good and getting outside. So.
I will say that we need to think very deeply about the interconnectedness of policy and how our lives interact with one another. If you think about why people don't participate in democracy, why they don't vote, or why don't they show up for a meeting, or why can't they serve on a local board? If you have people who are required to work several jobs, don't have childcare, can't afford to pay their rent, or have access to safe and affordable health care, then it's really hard to be an active and engaged citizen beyond kind of checking the box, and so to speak. So when we think about really strengthening public oversight of our commons, of our rivers, of these public-led entities, we need to think about how we are supporting the people who comprise that democracy. And if we can think about that and act in solidarity and with compassion with one another to build a stronger democracy, then we can actually have more oversight and participation in this area. And I'll also just add, vote, because our government is a reflection of ourselves and our values. And so if we don't like when we hold up that mirror, if we don't like what's reflected back at us, then, it's up to us, because we are the people who control that, to maybe swap out who's in those positions. So vote, participate, respect one another.
Thank you. And Ms. O'Neill, you've got the last word. One thing people can do to protect their water.
I mean, I second what Eric says in terms of being involved. A lot of the hard work is done by the people that are in the communities and bringing things to the attention of authorities and bringing the attention of issues to pretty much everyone. And I think that that's probably the strongest, most meaningful thing that you can do is get involved. On a side note, I just shared a link to where our data maps are, and shout out to a couple of our folks that do sampling. I know Dave's on here and Sara is on here. They're out there every month doing our sampling. We're open for watershed groups or individuals that are out collecting data. If you want to contribute to the waters database and have a place for your data to live for a long time and get it up on the maps, we wholeheartedly welcome that and would love to hear from you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. And thank you to all for being here tonight. Thank you especially to the panelists for the time that you put into preparing your pre-recorded presentations and then being here in person, well, virtually live to answer questions and to share your knowledge and insights. You are fabulous. Please join us in 2 weeks on Wednesday, October 14th at 7 p.m. for a special student screening of the story of plastic. The registration link is the same as the one for tonight. You can find the event on Facebook, BCMAC's Facebook page. So please share it with any students that you know. Please stay on for a couple more minutes while we list tonight's sponsors. Look them up, like them on Facebook, come back in 2 weeks, and have a wonderful night. Thank you.